So yeah, thank you so much, Felix, for joining us today. Yeah, so I guess just to start off, who are you? Where do you come from? What are your ballroom affiliations? How did you come to ballroom and when did it happen?
Okay, so again, Felix Rodriguez, also known as Felix Milan. I am Puerto Rican, born in New York, raised in Puerto Rico, and came back to New York to go to college. So I went to NYU for dramatic writing because I'm dramatic. And, that was 1990 when I was at NYU. And I came out of the closet in 1990, which was exactly when Madonna came back from her Blonde Ambition tour. So Vogue was very popular. It was mainstream. Straight people were dancing it in clubs. And I was in the Village going to NYU and surrounded by all this beautiful dancing and culture. So all my life growing up in Puerto Rico, I looked at being gay, even though I knew I was, deep down inside, as something that was really negative. I grew up as a born-again Christian, where I was taught that I was gonna burn in hell because I was gay or I had gay thoughts. So I repressed it for many, many years. So when I came out in 1990, I was 23, so start doing the math, which was considered to be late, right? A lot of people come out when they're teenagers, and I came out so late because I didn't accept my own identity. I was repressing it for many years. I knew that there was something that I was missing. You know, I went to school, I had a good job, and I still felt like there was something that was missing and I didn't know exactly what it was. So I went back to school. I went to NYU for grad school. And when I was at NYU, I was surrounded by all these gay and lesbian, transgender people that were really proud of being LGBTQ. And they weren't the stereotypical images that I had in my mind. They were, you know, three-dimensional, and they were gay men that were butcher than me and were really proud of being gay. And I was just like, I thought all gay men were very feminine and, you know, were hairdressers. And, you know, I had like the cliche of what gay men were. And I started, you know, the first gay men that I met were part of the ballroom scene. The first gay man that I met from the ballroom scene was Angel Infinity. He now lives in Miami, Florida. And he started talking to me about the balls, and I, you know, really didn't understand. I knew about voguing, I knew about Madonna's video, but I really didn't understand. So he started taking me to the clubs, and that's when I started seeing the transgender, and I started hearing about realness and face and body. And, you know, I just saw them competing, and I was just like, wow, this is really amazing, right? Then shortly after that, I met Hector Extravaganza. I met him at this club called the Sound Factory. The Sound Factory was an after hours that opened at 12 midnight and sometimes closed at 12 p.m. or 1 or 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday. So a lot of fun. That's where Madonna apparently met Jose and Luis, her dancers in the Blonde Ambition tour, the Voguers. And it was an exciting time. It was an exciting time to be at the Sound Factory. And I met Hector Extravaganza, and immediately he told me about what it was like to be an extravaganza, what it was like, you know, being part of the ballroom scene. And I still had not been to a ball. And in one weekend, on a Friday night, it was in 1991, I went to see Paris is Burning. It was playing at the Film Forum in New York City. I saw that on Friday night. And when I saw Paris is Burning, because I had already met people in the ballroom scene, I felt like I already had been there, right? They had talked about being, about the balls with so much passion and so much devotion, you know, that I felt like I had been to one, right? And then what was amazing to me until this day, I still consider Paris is Burning one of my favorite documentaries. It was the first time that I saw a film that had people that I recognized, even though I didn't know them, right? Even though I had never been to a ball, it was very familiar. And, you know, the soundtrack of Paris is Burning, when I heard this music that I loved, that I heard on the radio, that I danced to, it was just great to see it on a big screen, right? I had mixed feelings because, you know, I was in a theater with predominantly white people, and they were laughing in moments that I didn't think were necessarily funny, right? So it was a little disturbing to be in a room, finally, you know, growing up as a Black Latino, right? A Black Puerto Rican, growing up to seeing shows like The Brady Bunch and, you know, I Dream of Jeannie. And, you know, there was, you know, the only people that looked like me on TV at the time when I was growing up were like, you know, Good Times and the Jeffersons. But to see the characters in Paris is Burning, it just made me feel great, right? Like, oh, this community is recognized and we are important and we do matter, right? But then when they were laughing in moments that I didn't think was so funny, it felt like we were being exploited, right? So that was Friday night. And then Sunday night, I went to my first ball, which was the Milan Extravaganza Ball at the Sound Factory. It was called the War Ball, because during that time we were going through the Gulf War. And you know, back then balls weren't so common. They happened, you know, every 3 to 4 months. And whenever they would have a ball, it would have a theme. And usually it would be a theme that was topical, that was about something that was going on in the world. And because we were going through the Gulf War, the ball was called the War Ball, and the categories were based loosely on like military themes. They had a play on words. So that's when they had the first time that they had the category called arms control, where even though voguing was popular and it had broken down into the different elements, they, in this particular ball, wanted to only focus on the elements of using your arms. And since then, that category has still stayed, or that name has stayed the same, where you're just moving your arms and it's called arms control. They also had the ground floor, again, using a play on words. And the category was you were gonna be voguing on the floor and you weren't supposed to stand up. If you stood up, you got chopped. So I went to a ball, and it was interesting because, again, I had never been to a ball. There was a lot of lingo that I didn't understand. But even though it was the first time I heard the lingo, like that was the first time I heard "you better work." And I'm like, he doesn't have a job? Like, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean you better work? But I got it with the context, right? You understood what they meant, you know, because, you know, that was the first time I saw this, right? And I was like, are they approving? Are they disapproving? It took a while for me to understand exactly what they meant when they were doing these things, and when they were saying over, right? Oh my God, that was over, you know? So I quickly embraced this world. And because I was going to NYU, I took a film class, and I had a camera, and I never let go of that camera. It was my way of coming out. It was my way of discovering this new world. It was my way of discovering myself. And because it was the early 90s, you know, New York was devastated by HIV and AIDS. So the community was quickly disappearing. And you would go to a ball, and 3 months later, you would see 3 or 4 people that were no longer there. And the response that usually people have would be like, they're either dead or in jail. That was the assumption. If they're not here, that means that they're dead or they're in jail. So as a videographer, as a filmmaker, I felt it my duty, right, my mission to go to these balls and record them and treasure them, right? Because I felt like, you know, in 10 years, none of these people are gonna be here. And coincidentally, in 5 years, I came out in 1990, And I would say like 90% of the people that I met were dead by 95. So I had this urgency, right? I had this urgency to record them. And plus I also acknowledged how talented they were. You know, I was obsessed with the trans. Like I couldn't believe that a man, a person that was born as a man, right, transitioned into this beautiful woman that didn't need makeup. And at the time there was the surgery wasn't as advanced as it is today, right? So without a lot of surgery and without a lot of makeup, they can pass. And it was just like amazing to me to see these women and also see these men, right? See these trans men, right? That looked amazing. So I would explain it to my friends and family and they wouldn't understand it. So my best way of showing them was showing them a video of the ball. So I would literally walk around with a VHS. I'm dating myself, right? A VHS of a ball and be like, you want to know what I'm talking about? Watch this, right? And it was, you know, it was contagious. So I was obsessed with it. And shortly after going to balls and meeting the people in the community, I became a member of the House of Milan. And I never walked the ball, but my category, as I say, was videotaping them, right? I would videotape them from the beginning to the end, you know, and a lot of times they would hire me to videotape the ball. And then what I would do is I would sell the ball tapes to the participants. So it was like a little income for me at the time. But again, it was also, it was like, you know, I don't know, it's just kind of like when I was recording them, I remember my hand would shake, you know, like, oh my God, I hope my battery doesn't die. I hope my tape doesn't end at this particular point. Because when they were voguing or when they were doing Femme Queen Face or Butch Queen Body or whatever the category was, it was so good. And there was so much energy in the room that I was just like, the last thing I want right now is for this to end, right? I wanted to make sure that I documented it all. So fast forward to 2020, I want to say probably almost 10 years ago, I decided that I was no longer going to work in the film industry. I worked for many years as a video producer and director. I worked on several nonprofit organizations and produced public service announcements. And I got to a point where my career wasn't where I felt it should be by this point. So at this point, I was probably already in my 40s. And I was competing with 20-year-olds, right? And I was just kind of like, you know, I tried it. It's not for me. I'm just going to settle and get a day job and pay my bills. And I'm just going to put this to the side. If anything happens in the future, it happens. But right now, I just need to focus on my 401k. And then Pose happened, right? Pose came out and it was exactly the era that I came out in. And, you know, I had all my tapes collecting dust and I was like, wait a minute, there's obviously an interest in this footage and I'm not doing much with it. So I started a page, Old School Ballroom. And I realized immediately that as soon as I started posting these videos, there was so much interest, right? There were so many people contacting me from all over the world, asking me all these specific questions, like how was it back then? And what were the categories? And when did Femme Queen performance start? And when did this? And I was like, wow, so I guess I'm onto something here, you know? And then my friend Hector Extravaganza died, right? So, you know, it was eerie, it was surreal that someone who encouraged me to videotape these balls and that was very supportive of me throughout my entire career, I was videotaping his memorial. He had a celebration of life and it was at Museo del Barrio in East Harlem. And the mayor of New York City proclaimed the day, the Hector Extravaganza Day. And it was an amazing show, it was a great celebration. And Jenny Livingston, the director of Paris is Burning, was there. And as I was leaving the theater, she was with a friend of mine and I met her. And I told her, oh my God, I love Paris is Burning. You don't understand how much it's meant to me and how much it influenced my life. And I'm a filmmaker as well. And her first question is, so what film are you working on? And I'm like, humana. Well, I'm not really working on anything right now. She's like, well, if you ever decide to, you could always reach out to me or whatever. You know, you can reach me here on Facebook and blah, blah, blah. And as she said that to me, I said, thank you, Hector. Like, even after death, he was still opening doors for me, and he was still supportive and taking my career to a next level. So right now I'm in the process of producing a documentary about the history of ballroom, right? So we have Paris is Burning, which cannot be, you know, I guess there's no such thing as a Paris is Burning Part 2, right? She did an amazing job at, if you never knew what ballroom was, to understand what the ballroom community is, at least from one perspective, right? And from one era, right? Because obviously that was the late 80s, early 90s, and it's changed in a lot of ways. But generally, if somebody that I talk to doesn't know what ballroom is, the first thing that I would just say is watch Paris is Burning and you'll get it, right? But there isn't anything that we can really see as a documentary that really explains the history of ballroom. When did it start and how did it get to where it is today? So that's what my documentary is going to be about. There's still a handful of people that are alive from the original ballroom scene when it started in the late 60s, early 70s. So I want to interview these people before they're gone and make sure that I document their history, right? So a lot of what I know, as a disclaimer, has been told to me, right? It's been passed on word of mouth. There's no documentation. So all the stories that I've heard, like I'll give you an example. Supposedly, the term over came from Diana Ross's Love Hangover, right? You know that part when it goes, over, right? That was the part that all the femme queens wanted to come out to, right? So that was the over part. I want to come out on the over part. Apparently that's what, you know, and again, these are all stories that I've heard from people from the ballroom scene. Some people will debate it, some people will agree. That's part of the thing that I would like to do in my documentary, which is talk about all these, you know, urban tales that we hear and kind of get to the bottom of it. So I've been going on and on and on. I don't know if you want to.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, it's great. Yeah, you have so much history, and I think I really appreciate you being quite open and sharing all of that. There's so much. we could do way longer than an hour interview about this. I think you actually answered quite a few questions already. So maybe the next thing I would like to ask you is, as ballroom is kind of it's reaching its renaissance sort of in a way right now, and kind of finding its ways back into music, back into film, back into TV. Also in a lot of ways, people producers are approaching it from a ballroom perspective now, and really getting people from the community to like help produce and educate. How do you feel? How do you feel about that right now? And also, I guess in relation, the opposite of that, people appropriating quite heavily now the form and the culture.
So I have mixed feelings, right? Again, because I grew up not seeing my images on television, right? Not seeing my community represented, I think is a great thing. So for those kids out there, specifically kids of color that are LGBTQI, right? And they see Legendary, or they see Pose, or they see My House, they're you know, they're happy to see that there's a community out there that understands them and supports them, and that there's somewhat acceptance, right? There's always the risk of when something becomes pop that it loses its essence, right? So you say they're coming now back into the forefront, right? That's true in a way, right? They're now in front of the camera, but they've always been behind the camera. If you think about pop culture, the people that dress do their makeup, do their hair, choreograph, are all people from our community, right? So we've always been part of pop culture, right? It's just that we haven't been in the front of the camera, right? And if we have been in front of the camera, we're not admitting that we're gay or that we're part of the ballroom scene, right? So it's the first time in a long time that we're getting to see this, right? So my concern is there's houses opening up all over the world. People are voguing all over the world. But do they know the history? Do they know where this came from? Do they know why houses were created? Even though we're in 2020, there's still people that are joining houses for the same reasons that they joined the 70s, right? There's still oppression, there's still homophobia, transphobia. So people take these houses and really adopt them as their homes. That's why they have the mother and the father, right? Because they literally are family. Are they family in Italy? Are they family in Japan? You know, or are they just clubs that are voguing together and competing? I'm not sure, but I would imagine that the broader they become, right, these houses become, the less of that connection, of that history they may have. So that's one thing that, you know, I know that you will lose. It's interesting to see, right? Again, being part of this community that, you know, it changed when I was going in the 90s, but I know that before Paris is Burning, nobody wanted to go to the balls, right? Not even, there were a lot of gay people that didn't want to go to balls because it was considered to be low class. You know, it was in Harlem, they were in these, you know, these little clubs that they would only open at really, really late hours, after hours. I mean, I know some balls started at 5 in the morning, right? Because that was the only way that they were able to get a location either for free or for very cheap, right? So it has evolved to where now people are really interested in them, right? And, you know, I think that, I lost my train of thought. But yeah, I guess that back then, a lot of people didn't want to be a part of it. And now everybody wants to adapt it and imitate it. And in a way, it's like, there's a thin line between paying homage and imitating, where it almost becomes condescending, right? It almost becomes like, you know, you're an outsider looking in and you're kind of mocking this world, right? I mean, I question it myself when I see people around the world, you know, commentating, and they commentating like a Black or a Latino from New York, but they're French. Like, are you paying homage, or are you just imitating this, right? Or are we that fab that you want to be like us? Like, what is it, right? So it's I question that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think there's a lot to think about, especially right now, about how we, like people like me specifically too, that are guests to this culture, and how we operate in a way that really honors and respects the lineage and the history of where this culture comes from and the people. Yeah, I think there's so many ways to do that, and I think it's the best thing you can do is just keep thinking of finding more ways, and always being open. So yeah, this is great.
I saw on your website that you have a clip, or at least I think a scene of the Queen, right?
Yeah, yeah.
That's definitely like for me at least, is a perfect example of why the gay balls started in Harlem by Crystal LaBeija, right?
Mm-hmm.
Crystal LaBeija was fed up by going to balls and knowing that she had the talent and that she had the beauty, but she never won, right? Mm-hmm. She would win uptown in Harlem, but she wouldn't win downtown, right? So in the Queen, you see there's like, what, 5 finalists, 3 of color, but the white blonde Queen is the one who wins. And Crystal just had it. She was like, I'm not, and she didn't back down. She was a pioneer in so many ways because she was not letting them tell her otherwise. She was not having it, right? Even to the point when they said to her, "You're showing your color." They have a right to show my color, you know? So Crystal Abeja was the one. So balls existed before Crystal Abeja, and balls obviously have existed after, but the ball that we know started from that movement, started from, you know, and they started as pageants, right? They were pageants and they only had 1 or 2 categories, and they would walk, you know, evening wear or a bathing suit or a hairstyle or hat or a costume or whatever. And then they started evolving to what they are today, right? So I would say in the mid 80s was when what we called at the time the Butch Queens, right, started going to the balls more and started creating more categories. And after a while, the Butch Queens took over, right? To the point where the Femme Queens barely had any categories. It was run by the Butch Queens. All the categories were mostly for the Butch Queens. And even when they had Femme Queen categories, there weren't many Femme Queens walking, so they would, you know, they wouldn't even walk the category, so they would go on to the next. So I've seen in my, you know, 20 to 30 years that I was, you know, documenting balls, I saw how it changed and how it became more and more a gay man's event as opposed to a trans, right? And I've seen how now you have more cisgender women that are in the Vogue categories, right? When I was going to balls, Femme Queen performance was kind of like an experiment, right? They were still molding femme performance, right? For the actual Femme Queens, there was a lot of similarities, and they would say, no, you have to be softer. You can't vogue like a Butch Queen. You have to vogue like a femme. And I saw how they started making it more femme and more distinct. And then they decided to say, well, let's try this. Let's have, because, you know, they would have the Femme Queen categories, and the sidelines, you would see all the Butch Queens voguing, right? And voguing even better than the Femme Queen. So they were like, let's do a category and call it Butch Queen Vogue Femme, right? And let's throw in some heels, Butch Queen Vogue Femme and pumps, right? And it evolved to what we have today, which that's one of the biggest categories, right? You barely vogue the old way, you barely vogue new way. It's mostly femme performance, twisters, and you know. So yeah, so it's been interesting to see how the balls have evolved. It's been interesting to see how emceeing, right, commentating has evolved. When I was going to balls, David Ian Extravaganza and Melissa Extravaganza were the first that I saw that were actually chanting to the music. Before then, it was just a commentator, right? But they were the ones who started incorporating the music with the chant, and people were getting more excited and dance better, right? They were more inspired by this person that was, yeah, whoa, bring it down, whatever, I can't do it. But you know what I mean? Yeah. And now look what it's evolved. It's like they're rapping, right? They're rapping, and you know, sometimes in some cases you don't even have to listen to the music because the MC is the one that's inspiring them for them to do their vogue and do the dip at the right time.
Yeah, Felix, I'm interested. You just talked about this idea of how these categories are developing and kind of how they evolved in time, and I'm wondering what you have to say about the idea of category development. And you know, we talked about before, like I asked you if there was like a butch, like a trans man performance, and then also within that, as we go into more of a woke community now, how gender and the defining of gender is becoming more fluid and more open, and how does gender breakdowns in balls now, which I've seen are shifting, and even the term femme queen is being less and less used and just calling like women's performance, how that's shifting.
So I believe that the generation dictates, right? The generation dictates what the categories are and how the whole concept changes, right? And then what I'm noticing at my age now is that there's a conflict between generations, right? The new kids don't want to associate with the old kids, and the old kids have nothing to do with the new kids because that's not what balls are, right? They're not what they used to be in those categories, right? So, you know, I feel, you know, as, you know, the 52-year-old that I am now, that I'm open to accept that the world is changing, right? It can't be the same way that it was in the 70s, 80s, or 90s, right? It has to evolve. And now we're living in a more gender fluid world, right? Where, you know, back then, again, I keep dating myself, right? But back then when we had the flyers, right, the actual paper, right, that they were divided, right? When you opened the flyer, the left side was all the Femme Queens categories and the right side was all the Butch Queen categories. There was no mixing. There was no open to all. It was very, you know, black and white, or for lack of a better term, blue and pink, right? Like if you were Butch, you were Butch. And if you were gay, you were gay. And if you were a femme, you were a femme, but you couldn't cross over. It was a sign of the times, right? Now it's a lot more fluid, and I embrace it, right? And I'm glad that it keeps evolving, and that the ballroom should obviously evolve too. And I know there has been resistance in changing it because those categories were so legendary, right? I'm not sure if realness is as relevant today as it was in the 80s and 90s, right? Because there was, in that era, there was something that was really necessary, right? The gay community wanted to pass. They wanted to be able to be what we called unspookable. They didn't want to come off as being gay. If you were trans, you didn't want people to spook you, right? But now we live in an era where you can be spooked and it's okay, or it should be okay, right? It's not necessarily okay either, but it should be, right? So I believe that that's just a sign of the times, and there is a lot of resistance in change, but there should be a lot more, we should embrace it.
Yeah, I'm excited to see there's been such a shift. Also, like I've been seeing actually such a an interest in old way. Actually, like you can see that people are starting to get back on that train, and that new way the girls are coming out too more. You know, and like almost as a revert to the amount of acrobaticness that is in performance now, and like Vogue Femme, like people are trying to go back because it's like after you can do backflips and drop and do all this crazy stuff, like what is next in performance, you know, in Vogue Femme, like so people just go, like they're almost like going back in time to like rediscover in a way, which is really exciting to me. Yeah, so I wanna.
That's sorry, how you know, that's how you know you're old, when you see the full.
Yeah, the full circle.
It was, it existed, it went away, and now it's back, right? You know, I've been around that long that I can see the whole evolution. Yes, but yeah, I agree. I think that it was necessary to have the femme category, right? And it developed to what it is. But now they're paying more homage, right, to this other form that hasn't been used in a long time, which is the new way and the old way. You know, I associate the old way with b-boy dancing, right?
And popping as well, right? And like
popping and all that stuff. It's kind of another form. It's the feminine form of street dancing that existed at the time. So again, it all goes with time, right? At the time in the Bronx and in Manhattan, that's what they were doing. They were breakdancing, right?
Yeah.
So the LGBTQ community decided, well, we're going to do our own form of breakdancing, and we're going to do it more fabulous.
That's fab. I love that. I want to open up to whoever's in the chat in our Zoom meeting. If we have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat or unmute yourself. But maybe we'll do a hand, or put your hand up via the chat app, or you can just unmute yourself. Oh yeah, Jan, unmute.
Yeah, I have a question. By the way, thank you so much, Felix, for being here with us. Those are actually experiences that you cannot Google, so I thank you. Yeah, I myself is like a baby voguer and new to a lot of these things, so it's really great to learn all these stuff. So my question now that I'm struggling around my friends as well, who've asking me and watch Vogue here in Vancouver with Band Vogue Jam, is few things that I can't answer. Like I think I answered them, but it's not too clear for them. It's the idea of like the judges being very cutthroat, and because the idea of Vogue, as I told them, is like a family, and because in the 80s there's always the oppressed people, transgender, colored people, and Vogue is pretty much like a way for them to express what they cannot express outside ballroom, as I learned from Paris is Burning. But then when they get in, like my friends on the voguing community, they're like, why is everybody so mean? And I just told them, it's just the nature of it. And it just makes them stronger as an individual. So that's what I'm stuck with. And I'm hoping you can probably like give me some tips and enlighten me how I can answer that.
It's tough love, you know, it's tough love. It's like when you come from an environment that you were used to being beat up, you know, you were used to being ridiculed and bullied, then you develop a tough skin. And as a mother and father of a house, what you want to be able to train your kids is to be able to confront people on the street that are gonna attack them or bully them, right? So I think, again, it goes back to the time when the balls were created. These were people that were really angry, and they were defying everything, right? They were, you know, dodging getting beat up just to get to the club, right? If they wanted to wear something, they had to either wear it on the train ride to the club or right before they got in, because they couldn't walk in their neighborhoods in the outfits that they really wanted to, for lack of a better term, pump, right? So that's where it comes from. The shade, right? What we call the shade. The shade comes from, we all come from these really rough neighborhoods, and we came from really rough upbringings. And the only way we knew how to share love was by teaching it through tough love, right? They didn't pamper you. They didn't say, okay, it's gonna be okay, and you can do whatever you want. No, they were strict to you. And I think it also comes with pride, right? I think that because it took a lot of people a lot of hard work to get to where they were as far as becoming legendary and icons, right? They had to literally fight, right? They had to literally fight to earn that trophy, right? So they're not gonna give it away. They're not, just because you're cute and your Vogue is kind of okay, they're not gonna just clap you and say, right. No, they're gonna be like, bitch, you better go back and learn some more. You know what I mean? Like, no, so that's
work.
So yeah, so it comes from that.
Thank you. Yeah, that actually gives me more confidence. Yeah, sorry.
What kind of Vogue do you perform?
I've just been learning like mostly of the femme Vogue right now, and really want to learn more about that, and also would love to learn like old Vogue soon. Yeah. Yeah.
Nice to meet you.
You too.
Thanks, Ben, for that question. We have something in the chat, so I'm just gonna ask that question in the chat. This is from Ivy. Any insight into the history of bazaar category? This is Ivy's one of their favorites. Ivy is the mother of the Kiki House of Andromeda in our city, so one of the two houses, the Kiki houses here. Yeah, but so they've been trying to do research online, and it's kind of hard for them to look online. Do you have any information about bazaar or the history of it?
There was a very popular commentator in the late 90s called Eric Bazaar, right? Eric Christian Bazaar, and that was his category, right? They've always existed, you know. They had like futuristic bazaar and all kinds of, you know, effects, right? Sometimes categories where the costumes had to be made of material that wasn't, you know, easy to find or to make or whatever. So you would make suits out of rubber and foam, and, you know, they weren't the biggest categories, you know. So, you know, again, every generation has like their, you know, staple of the categories that are popular. I would say the era, so I really was recording balls, I want to say from like 92 to like 96. Those were the main years that I recorded balls. And the categories that were popular in that era were femme queen face, right? And runway, labels, right? They had a label category called labels, labels, and more labels, or head to toe overness, right? Where you had to be done from head to toe. And then the voguing categories, right? But Bazaar was not one of, at least in the era that I was recording them, weren't as popular, but they definitely gave them a lot of props because they saw the amount of work that went into preparing these costumes. You know, you had costumes that would light up, so they would actually ask the venue to turn off the lights because their costume was going to light up in the dark and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say if she can, is it she or he?
They use they them pronouns.
Oh, they. So ask them to do a search on Eric Bazaar, because he definitely was the pioneer of that category.
Cool. Thanks, Felix. We have another question on the side. This is from Kim. I have seen voguing at the protests that are happening, specifically in Chicago and Illinois. I was wondering if you had an opinion on Vogue as a form of protest, resistance, empowerment. Would love to hear your thoughts.
I think the whole point of voguing is a form of protest. You know, it's like a fight. You're like fighting. I mean, when you're voguing, when you're battling, I mean, the whole term battle, what does that mean? You're fighting, right? You're being defiant. You're saying, you know, I'm proud of who I am, and I am showing you that my form of dance, even though it's not commercial, it's who I am, right? So it is a form of, you know, it's controversial and, you know, daring and putting yourself out there. So yeah, I definitely agree that it should be something. I know that, you know, recently in Puerto Rico, they got rid of the governor, and they had protests, and they were doing the same thing. They were voguing and doing dips in front of the Capitol, right? So more power to them.
Yeah. Wow. We have another question from Clyde. Do you know of any more info on the crossover between breaking and other forms of street dance and Old Way? I'm assuming it just kind of happened, but I've always wanted to find those people's stories of how it happened. This is from Clyde.
Yeah, I can't really say exactly, right? I can just go by what I observed, right? And because of the time, right? Because when you see the Old Way, there is the style that comes a lot from breakdancing, right? So I can't name like a actual person that started it, right? Or I can't name, you know, exactly, you know, what moves they imitated, but it definitely came from because of the era, right? Because it started in the 70s and 80s, and that's what they were dancing in the Bronx and in Manhattan, where most of the people that were part of the ballroom were from.
Cool. Do we have any other questions? Anything else anyone wants to ask? I have loads, so I can also ask them.
Yeah.
I guess I'll ask. I'm interested because I started in the street dance world, went into a contemporary kind of practice, and like I'm also a contemporary dancer. I'm interested how much I think we might have talked about this before on Instagram on our own chat, but how modern and ballet and contemporary dance has affected the performance categories, or just people's involvement in ballroom in general. And if you have an opinion or thought about that.
Well, one thing that I've noticed is that the voguing categories were a lot of people that were just born with the talent, right? They weren't trained dancers. And now I see a lot of trained dancers in these competing in these categories. So the stakes are higher because you're not just competing with somebody off the street that just learned, you know, at the pier or in their living room. Now you're voguing against people that come from, you know, years and years of formal training. So as much as I like the fact that you have professional dancers that are participating, it definitely takes also that edge away from it, right? Where you really applauded somebody because you knew that they learned this on their own, right? There was no school or teacher that taught them how to do that, or, you know, they didn't do like, you know, formal stretching. They just came from the train. They just got off the train and did this dance at the club, right? And perfected it on their own terms. So so I have mixed feelings about it, right? Like, because I do appreciate I believe that, you're born with talent, right? You can go to a school and you can learn to perfect your talent, but you either have it or you don't, right? And one of the things that you saw in the balls, at least in the early 90s, was that raw talent, that it wasn't taught. It was something that they were born with it, right? And that was what was really exciting to me, was like, wow, this person is amazing. Look at all the things that they can do. And they just learned this on their own without, so that's what, that's what I appreciated about it. It's that raw talent.
Yeah, I feel like when you go to a ball and you see a girl perform, you know when they got it, you can feel it. Like the first 4 counts, you can feel it. Like trained, not trained. And I think that's really telling of like the immediacy of the form and how the format of like a ball is like if you know a girl's, she's got it when she walks on that stage. It's like that first second.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, but it's about the feeling, right? So I love to dance as well, right? And I dance salsa. I'm a salsa dancer, salsa teacher. There's something about the music at a ball that even though I wasn't dancing, I was videotaping it, I felt like I wanted to dance as well. It was contagious, right? And the energy in the room, right? Everybody cheering you on and the, the people egging you on just gave you this momentum, right? Because I know most people, have you ever competed on a ball?
Yeah, right? I walked in New York and yeah.
Oh, cool. So you can relate to the fact that when you're so in this trance competing, a lot of times after it's over, you didn't even remember what you did, right? You just
did. Which is
it's a great feeling, right? It's great when you can just let the music take you over and see what happens, right? Not have this like calculated, okay, I'm gonna start with this and I'm gonna move into this and then I'm gonna do this step. No, it's just like whatever you're feeling at the time, go with it. And we can recognize that, right? Us, the audience and the judges will be able to see that and say, this is a talented person and creative, right?
I'm just looking at the time, and I think we should start closing up a little bit. Do you have any last things you want to say? Things you want to promote? I know you're working on this documentary.
Yes.
Anything else you want to say?
I'm working on this documentary. The working title is "Bring It to the Runway." If anyone wants to support the documentary, you can reach me through Venmo. My Venmo is Felix Rodriguez -29, and no, that's not my age or the year I was born. You can follow me on Old School Ballroom, right, on Instagram. I also have a Facebook page and a YouTube page, which I'm slowly building. So like I mentioned before, I was not really uploading any videos on any of these platforms, and now I've been a little bit more active. So definitely follow me there. And yeah, I mean, you can always ask me questions. I love to educate people. I mean, again, I feel like this is my mission. And I only have like this little window of history that when I was recording balls and because I was part of the House of Milan. There's definitely a lot of other people that have tons of history. So if I don't know the answer to a question, I may be able to find out, right? So if you ever have questions, just follow me on Old School Ballroom on Instagram, or you can also reach me at, again, I'm dating myself, but my email, oldschoolballroomdvd@gmail.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Thank you. I'm just gonna ask everyone to leave and then Felix will stay on with me. But thank you everyone so much. I'm gonna turn off this live. Enjoy the rest of your day. Felix, stay on with me.